So tell me what is new. What do you want to talk about?
I want to just share what we're looking at PCMA for the next year. I have 3 big pots. Like when I get the gavel tomorrow afternoon, Desiree, you'll basically see this on my slides, how I'm kind of thinking through the year. So the first and foremost is this whole idea of this exponential growth strategy. So PCMA right now is about 8,000 members and a community of about 50,000 people, and that engaged community of about 50,000. And what the engaged community means is, for the most part, those are people who have...
Is that global? Or?
Globally,
okay.
Yeah. Heavily North American, but our growth has been heavily driven globally.
Right.
Because North American, we're fairly well saturated, not completely, and there's still market growth there.
Sure.
But through acquisitions and through other efforts in EMEA, which is Europe, Middle East, Africa, Asia Pacific, in LATAM, all the Latin American countries, so we've grown in those 3 areas far more than North America. But North America is still great. So right now we're at a little over 8,000 members. A little under 7,000 of those 8,000 are kind of traditional PCMA members. The rest of the growth has been through like acquiring ISAP in Asia, by acquiring SEMA, by acquiring a new UK. So these kind of acquisitions have been where our real growth is had, but in the exponential growth strategy, we want to grow more organically than just acquisition. And our goal is by the end of 2030, so basically in 7 years, not quite 7 years because minus a week. In that time, we will go from 8,000 members to 25,000 members. So people who will actually pay to be a member. And here's the real kicker. Our engaged community will grow from 50,000 to 300,000. So that's what you're going to see on my slide tomorrow. So when we call it an exponential growth strategy, that's exponential growth. We're not incrementally growing. We want to, and there's a whole lot of different ways to get from 8,000 to 25 on membership and from 50 to 300 on engaged community. But engaged community are people who are, and typically they're monetized in some way. So somebody at some point, even if they're not a member, they attended CL, or they did an online course, or they did some sort of digital certification, or they just subscribed to the magazine, or they bought an ad in the magazine. Whatever it is, somewhere, shape, or form we touch them. We know that globally there's well over 1 million people who do something in our sphere of influence.
Really?
They don't all call it the same thing. Do you know a guy named Oscar Cerizales from MCI? Yeah. So Oscar has been helping with it. We hired MCI to help us walk through the kind of understand the breadth of the market. We're building out personas right now to understand, because there's a big difference between how North America thinks versus Asia Pacific versus EMEA versus LATAM. There's a big difference between suppliers and business event strategists. There's a big difference within business event strategists.
Right.
If you're corporate versus association, versus the third parties that work with both, versus people who do digital events. So you really need to build out the personas, just like the way they do in consumer marketing. You know, you've got these ideas of kind of Joe and Mary Smith who live in the suburbs and drive a minivan. That's very different than Bob, the 38-year-old single who's driving the BMW, and how they think, right? So, and then even within that, if you are a 20 in your 20s versus if you are a 52-year-old woman who is the vice president of event strategy for a major association, very different mindset. I was at a table this morning where I spoke at breakfast where somebody who works for an association was talking about how she thinks after 30 years in the industry, and then she's talking to her in their 20s over there, and it was, not the same. I have a comment tomorrow where I talk about how the way I got into this industry, I was working for a Fortune 120 company in corporate communications, and I saw an ad in the Sunday newspaper. When does that happen anymore?
Well, that's how I got my first job in the industry. I answered a classified ad.
Yeah, it was a classified ad. I was a journalism undergrad. I worked in corporate communications for a Fortune 120 company, and I decided I didn't want to do that anymore. I started looking at other options, and most of the things I was looking at were working for other corporations. But then I saw a listing for the Director of Public Relations, San Jose Convention and Visitor Bureau, and I was like, "This is that
your first job in the industry?"
In the industry, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Got hired in late '94.
Okay. Oh, we started the same year.
Okay, cool. I worked there until 01, and then I got recruited to Sacramento. I worked there to 06, then I got recruited to San Francisco. Joe D'Alessandro's EVP for 5 years there. And then Mike Gamble came and said, "Have I got a deal for you? You ought to look at Indianapolis." And I've been there since 2011.
2011, okay.
So, and then I got involved in the PCMA board as a volunteer.
What year?
The PCMA National, I should say. In 2016, I was doing committee work. And then 17, I got on the board for the first
Okay.
So from 17 to 20 was my first 3-year board term.
Okay.
I rolled off the board, and in 2021, so 2020 calendar year and 2021 calendar year, I was off the board. In 2021, Greg Odell, who used to be Advanced DC, now he's OBG 360, he texted me like a week before the deadline for nominations and said, hey, I just nominated you for Secretary-Treasurer. I'm like, that's nice, Greg. Really appreciate that. He was the board chair my last year on the old board. So we had built that relationship.
Okay.
You've given me a week to go get my references and do the little interview questions that they make you do and prep for all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
You're like, yeah, you can do it. So I'm scrambling for a week to be like, who's going to be my 3 people who are going to be my references and all the rest of stuff. And then I got lucky and got the nomination for Secretary-Treasurer. That led to being incoming chair-elect. And then as of tomorrow afternoon, Desirée passes the baton. So I've had kind of 2 stints now. I'm on the 2nd stint.
Thank you for volunteering and stepping up. I know
great.
it takes a lot of time and a lot of energy and passion.
It takes a really dedicated team back home to let you do these things.
Yep.
One of my direct reports, her name's Susie Townsend. I don't know if you've met Susie, but Susie is our Chief Destination Experience Officer. So convention services, visitor services, those sorts of things. But right now, she is the chair of the MPI Foundation.
Oh, wow.
So we got MPI on that end with Susie. We got me with PCMA. We're probably the most
active
convention industry association active that there is out there when you got a chair of the foundation there in the PCMA. We never talk about stuff because there's a very specific proprietary, competition-sensitive things that Susie will not tell me about that she's privy to, and I don't ask her, and vice versa with PCMA. But we want to support both of them. So this exponential growth strategy actually goes all the way back. We started talking about it in my first term from 17 to 20 when I was just a board member. When I came back in 22 as Secretary-Treasurer, I was surprised to find out we had not gone beyond talking about it. I said in my first meeting back in 22, why are we relitigating this? I remember 3 years of this talk on the first board term. I've been gone for 2 years, and here in my 6 years into this, you're still talking about this whole idea of exponential growth. When are we going to do it?
Yeah.
And so eventually, like before the year was over, we approved the monies needed to hire Oscar. And like start actually fleshing this thing out. So
that is a huge increase. 8 to 25 and
so Desirée kicked it off.
So how are you going to do it?
So Desirée kicked it off, and so Oscar kind of are taking us through this assessment phase. I'm going to get the final end of assessment and the first end of really executing.
In this year.
Yeah, in this year, 24. And we're getting into things like branding, which uses those same personas, right? If you're going to brand, a house of brands now. We acquired the Event Learning Institute, ELI, Howard Gardner's company. That's really our training and development program now. But, do we keep calling it ELI powered by PCMA? Do we call it PCMA Education? What do we call that? The PCMA brand. Years ago, everybody knew what PCMA stood for. Professional Convention Management Association. It really technically doesn't stand for those words anymore. It just says PCMA. My Fortune 120 company was a company called FMC Corporation. They were headquartered in Chicago. When they were formed in the 1940s, 30s maybe, I can't remember. It was the early 1900s. They were Food Machinery Corp.
Right.
But at some point, like in the 40s during World War II, they converted a lot of their plants, not for food machinery, but to make defense vehicles and to the Allies and yada yada. And so at some point, FMC stopped meaning anything other than FMC. TMA, same way. It's not professional. It's technically not Professional Convention Management Association. So a lot of times we'll be like, somebody will ask you, well, what is PCMA? Well, it used to stand for Professional Convention Management Association.
100%.
What it is
I
now
do it all the time.
is it's the platform for the business events industry. So that's what we say. If you go to our website, it'll say we are the, and like the is capital, all capitals, the platform for the business events industry. So number one, first and foremost, is this whole idea of exponential growth. We're going to go to year 2 of a plan that takes us all the way to the end of 2030, and we're going to be doing things like looking at our membership model, looking at how we work with partners, looking at building out these personas that both help with the brand, and then also figuring out in each market with each persona, how do we grow that to get from 8 to 25 on the membership, to get from 50 to 300 on the engaged users.
So you think that that's based already on the research, that's a reasonable goal?
It's not reasonable, but that's what the goal. It's our moonshot.
Okay.
It's our moonshot.
Okay.
So I describe, you'll see a slide I put up tomorrow during the whole gavel thing where I talk about, right now we're in a solar system. I would describe us in a solar system of 8,000 members and 50,000 engaged users.
Okay.
We want to move to a galaxy level of 25 and 300. So Kennedy had a moonshot, we have a galaxy shot. The point of this is we got to the moon first, and we were intending to get to that 25 and 300.
Okay.
The people who are on the board right now with PCMA, a lot of the staff, are not the people who will be there in 2030 when we get to this. So we know we have a role along that way to get there. Second thing you'll see on my slides is that there are things that we haven't quite gotten just right. And I call it the Goldilocks zone. So in the Goldilocks zone, Goldilocks taught us that life is hard. Things are too hot and they're too cold. They're too soft and too hard. We're always working on just right. And in PCMA, there's two areas where I feel we have been, based on kind of just a listening tour that I've taken this past year, just listening to people. So the two things that I've heard for the most part is conflicting arguments on North America and global. I hear from a lot of people in North America that we're so over-focused on global and not focused on the core people that built PCMA.
Okay.
North America,
Okay.
US and Canada.
Yeah.
You know, and you're putting all these efforts and resources into EMEA and LATAM and APAC, and you're taking your eye off the ball in North America. Then I have people come to me and say, you know what, Leonard? You guys are so USA-centric still. And where all the growth is, if you really want to get exponential growth, it's all in Asia and Europe and South America. And we're barely scratching the surface there. And you really need to commit some more resources to that. Those are conflicting messages. So we haven't quite gotten it just right. Now, we'll probably never solve that for everybody. You're always going to have people saying one or the other.
Right.
But to the extent that somebody goes, you know, they're really walking that fine line of just right.
Right.
We want to get there.
You want it, yeah.
The other area besides geographically with North America versus global is this idea of the three biggest segments of what makes up PCMA. There's more than three, but the big umbrella segments are business event strategists, and within that, there's two. There's kind of that senior strategist and that next gen. And so I'm really counting mid-level in the next gen. What they want is very different. What Claire wants versus what my COO at Visit Indy, James Wallace, who's been there for 40 years, are very different. And how Claire expects the office to operate and is looking for an employer is different from James. Well, the same thing, you know, so the business event strategists who are the VP level titles, I feel we don't have enough of them applying for board anymore. A lot of them have told me they don't feel the content at CL or EduCon is enough for them, and it's way more meetings, industry 101 stuff for next gen, etc. So there's thinking about that and how we address that before we have a real issue where we're starting to just lose a lot of them in both in terms of membership and engagement. We can lose a lot of them because we're not going to get to 25K. Now, in the next gen, on the other hand, I hear things from them like, it's kind of token what you do for us. You say that, but where's the real meat? 20 in their 20s, okay, you're recognizing 20 people. Where's what you're really doing for us? And also, by the way, PCMA, like a lot of associations, can be cliquey. I see all these people who've been going to 25 convening leaders, and they all know each other. How do I become part of that? Now, you become part of that in a lot of ways by sticking to this and getting to know people over the course of 25 years. Like you and I have probably seen each other in hallways for 20 years. Yeah. But for whatever reason, we didn't connect because we didn't have to. But somewhere along the line, even if it wasn't this, we might have been in the same circle standing outside of Hall D and being like, oh, yeah, that's what you do. I know, I've seen you. And, you know, et cetera, et cetera.
Exactly.
So finding the just right of that. But then the third part of it, so you got senior strategists, next gen, but then you have suppliers. And suppliers like Visit Indy and all the people who make up the district here. Over the years, we have increasingly had a heavier and heavier burden of making the PCMA business model work. All the money is, for the most part, coming from the suppliers. We're heavily subsidizing an association that is meant to benefit business event strategists. At the same time, if we don't have a very robust business event strategist, we're not going to want to support the business model. At the end of the day, we are here to ultimately build relationships with people who we hope will be our customer. Either maintain the ones we have, grow that relationship, because people still like to do business with people they like. No matter what state legislation issue we're all battling, or how big our convention center is, or do we have enough rooms in the block, they still want to work with people they like to work with.
Of course.
And so the suppliers are kind of feeling like I guess, as I was told, I'm the first DMO person to ever be the chair of PCMA, the association.
Are you?
Yeah, we've had DMOs be the chair of the foundation.
But not of, you're the first? Really?
We've had 3 convention centers.
Wow.
So Clear in
Yeah,
Vancouver,
yeah.
Charles in Nashville last year, and then Greg Odell in DC. But they're all venue people.
Yeah.
And then
Oh,
we've
I
had,
didn't
then we've had-
realize
then
that.
We've had, like,
Congratulations.
well, thanks. We've had people like Philip Jones and Angie Rinaldi who work for DMOs chair the foundation because they were like, oh, you're fine. We'll let you chair an organization that raises money.
100%.
Yeah, that raises money.
Yeah.
But this is the first time because
Wow.
of the merger of the two
Yeah.
a couple of years ago that they've had a DMO guy or gal do it. So.
Yeah.
And then interesting, next year, Neil Brownlee from Visit Scotland will not only be
Oh,
the
is
second
that
DMO,
the-
and he'll
oh.
be the first international. He's our chair. He'll be our chair elect as of tomorrow.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, so all of a sudden we're going to have an international second DMO. Now that goes back to this whole thing about like, well, let's not go hog wild on this. Let's not have DMOs be the chair every year for the next 5 years,
Of
because
course
then
not.
the senior strategists pull back even more.
Right.
And then
right.
at the end of the day, if I don't have senior strategists walking through the district
Right.
and sitting in sessions, then why am I even
Right.
buying ads in Convene and going to
Yeah,
CL?
and supporting the event.
Right.
Okay.
So it's an ecosystem that's constantly evolving, and you got to
Yeah.
pay attention to, and you got to feed on all ends. The next gens, the senior strategists, the suppliers.
Sounds
So
like you have a big agenda.
Well, so that's the just right slide. So
Okay.
then the third and final
Yeah.
slide is
Okay.
we were also doing some things really well, and we should celebrate that and continue to ensure that we are the folks who the industry sees as doing that the best for them. So, for example, one of them is sustainability. Sherrif is very passionate about PCMA taking a leadership role in sustainability.
Yeah.
For example, we've worked with Singapore tourism. Singapore is, have you ever been there?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was there in November for the first time ever. I'll be back for Convening APAC. What an amazing
It's awesome.
story. That country is 3/4 the size geographically of the city of Indianapolis.
Yeah, small.
And they have 6 million people, and they are so self-sustaining with their water.
Oh, really?
their
I
greenery.
didn't know
Oh, yeah.
all that.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
I know they have all the green stuff and yeah.
So they've manifested all that green stuff to show who they are. That's who they are,
Oh,
right?
okay.
So Singapore tourism and PCMA have worked together on a sustainability plan.
Okay.
AGU, the American Geophysical Union, Lauren Parker's
Right.
on our board,
Yeah.
has a partnership with PCMA on climate change and
Yeah.
other sustainability issues. So that's one of those things where we don't say, hey, we're good, we're seen as the best. We need to keep being the best.
Right.
Another one is on the DEI front. PCMA actually throws in a B for belonging, but obviously diversity, equity, inclusion. And so we started Ascent years ago. Ascent was started to help.
I don't know. What is that?
So Ascent is essentially our DEI issues, but I'm personally passionate on what I consider a DEI issue that is not enough shout, and that is diversability. So this is people with disabilities. I have a son with cerebral palsy.
Yeah.
So helping this industry give more opportunities to people with physical challenges or different levels of physical abilities is a passion of mine personally.
I think it's changing. I love that they did the accessibility tour here,
Right.
2 of them.
Yep, I did it at EduCon.
That's
Yep.
awesome.
And then third is the brands, which we've touched on a little bit.
Yeah.
And so that is really looking at the PCMA brand. What does that mean
Yeah.
visually? What does it mean in strategy,
Okay.
identity? And then last but not least is AI.
Okay.
And you've already seen a bunch of that this
I
morning.
did.
And PCMA with Project Spark is a leader in that.
Yes,
and,
for
so
sure.
So those 4 things we want to continue to be the clear bellwethers for the industry.
Okay.
Sustainability, diversity, equity, inclusion, our own branding.
Yeah.
Because we're seen as the platform, but we need to be better of how we identify that. And then the last but not least, AI.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
my agenda.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you for
Yeah,
taking
sure.
a few minutes to sit down with me.
Yeah.